Do you know that building microservices applications is not easy as it seems? Especially when you move from monolith application to microservices, be cautious to not ship the same issues and problems you have in monolith application to the distributed system or the microservices you are going to build. How this can happen? Basically, in monolith application, there are common term known as spaghetti code. And this happens when you have code smell in your code base that there are interconnections and tightly coupling between the software components, and you are not able to define the single responsibility of each module or each service and the data ownership of this. And be cautious when you move from monolith application to microservices to not ship the same problem there. Because as we have a spaghetti code in single applications or monolith applications, there are similar concepts in distributed systems and microservices called distributed spaghetti code. And this happens basically when you try to move the code base. If you have something like this tightly coupled code base in single application, single monolith application, and you say, okay, we will split this and we will move it to microservices for better isolation, you might find yourself falling in this trap. How this can happen? Because, for example, I think this happened commonly for two reasons. The first one is lack of single responsibility principle, because in your monolith application, if you are not able to define boundaries for each single functionality, for each domain, and categorize your monolith application into domains, and based on these domains, you define the boundaries. And boundaries means you say this should be divided into X of services, and each service should be responsible for only one thing and only one thing. And if you are able to define your services boundaries and define your single responsibilities on the current code base which exists in the same project, you can ship it successfully to microservices where you don't have the spaghetti code. Otherwise, you will rebuild the microservices in the old architecture you have in monolith application, and instead of having tightly coupling between services in single process or single application, you will ship it over network. So you have all microservices interconnected and basically spaghetti over the network. And this is very costly rather than having a single application. And the second thing is, suppose you are successfully be able to separate your application into separate domains and define your boundaries. Be cautious also, as you did this on the code base level, you do this on data level. How this can happen? When you have a monolith application, basically you have single database and everything is connected together. And you might find, for example, some module do some queries on the database on other tables, and you have joins here and there. And when you move this to microservices, you should think about how can you split this into the microservices. And you should follow a very important principle here, which is data ownership. You should define within a single boundary of a single service, you should define the data that this service owns. And the meaning of ownership means the only way to access this data is using this service. And the only way to write to this data using this service. So this might not happen in monolith application. You might find queries in other modules and insertion in other modules. You want to do some sort of transactions from module A and B and C. So there is lack of responsibility here. When you move this to microservices, if you are not care about the data ownership you will find yourself in multiple challenges. And one of these challenges actually is data duplication. And the second challenge is basically it will be lack of data ownership. And this will lead, as I mentioned, to data duplication. You'll find one service having a copy of data from another service in its own database, and you will not be able to know how can you update data in single system, because you'll find yourself need to update the data in multiple systems, in multiple services, and this is not a good way to handle this. So having the concept of data ownership should exist before migrating your services to your monolith to microservices, because each service should encapsulate its own data, and there's no leakage either in code, in business logic, or in data to other services. So the only way to write to the data, to write data for this service and access data, this can be done only using this service, which is responsible for handling its own data. And if you are following these two important concepts, and basically these two concepts are derived from any programming language. In if you are writing OOP or functional programming, you should have every unit of code should be encapsulating its own data, and it should basically encapsulate its own business logic. And if you're able to define these and put boundaries and define the data ownership between services in your monolith application, you'll be able to migrate this successfully to microservices. And this is the tip for today. Be cautious about this, and see you later in more videos. Thank you.